Colonel Phil Roettinger had been a member of the Marines for years and years and years, now retired, 70, living in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. He's a painter. But for years he served in U.S. Marines. One of the top marksmen, was a member of the Olympic team way back in the 40s. And he served in Mexico as well as in Central America. Let's begin as he talks about joining the CIA back in January 51. And then in 54, he was sent to Guatemala, as he put it, to help overthrow, these are his words and you'll hear them in a moment, help overthrow the legally elected government of Arbenz in Guatemala. And he's recently visited Nicaragua, by the way. So let's just listen as he's having a sip or two and reflecting. Colonel Philip Roettinger, U.S. Marines, age 70, retired.
And so several of us served as judges for the Central American and Caribbean Games in Guatemala in 1950. So I knew something about the country. I had met President Arevalo at that time, who was the first democratically elected president of Guatemala. So anyway, they knew I had some knowledge of Guatemala. So they came to me and said, we'd like to have you become involved in this overthrow of the Guatemalan government. Well, okay, so that's fine. If it's a job, that's what we do. So I joined that effort, and that's, as we know, I was involved in the overthrow of the Arbenz government in Guatemala.
When was that?
What's that?
When was that?
That was in 1954.
Should you talk about that?
Well, yes, of course.
In 54.
That's all been written about. I mean, there have been books written about it and discussions and so forth.
I mean, you in it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, it's a curious thing that my name has never come up in any of these books that have been written about it.
You're a major.
Yeah, I was a major in the Marine Corps, but no, by this time I was Lieutenant Colonel in the Marine
You were
Corps
Lieutenant
Reserve.
Colonel.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Marine Corps Reserve, having served in the Reserve and taken active duty on various times.
How did that go when you were sent to Guatemala? How did that?
Well, of course, what happened was that in headquarters I was given the assignment to join this effort, which was based in Florida, in Miami, Florida, at the Opalaca Marine Corps base there. And I went down and joined the organization there and worked there for a while. And then I was sent down into Central America. I didn't go into Guatemala itself. I went to, first place I went to was El Salvador to organize a possible shipment of arms to the rebels in Honduras. And then finally I went over to Honduras and to Tegucigalpa and joined the group there that was actually doing the operation. There were a whole bunch of people that were involved in this thing, from Washington to Miami to I don't know what all. But actually down in Honduras, where the action was, there were only a very few people of us there. Nestor Sanchez was one, Dave Morales was another, Rip Robertson was one of the guys that was there with us. And he's now dead, by the way. He died of a heart attack some years ago. Dave Phillips, David Atlee Phillips, who is now retired and living in the Washington area, was down there also.
But Nestor Sanchez and you, just a parenthetical comment,
yes,
to catch up what you said earlier about it. This is interesting. In case we forget to talk about it later.
Yeah.
You and he were close.
Oh yes, we were good buddies. In fact, even before this, maybe a year before this, I had met Nestor in Washington.
Yeah.
He was going through training and so forth, and came to me when I was involved in training of certain aspects, and we were good friends. And I was delighted to when I got down there to find that he was there. I didn't know he was there, and Nestor is a nice guy. He's we could say a Mexican-American born in New Mexico, as a matter of fact, and fluent in Spanish. He was a key operative down there because he was the liaison between us and the Honduran government, Honduran army, and by reason of his fluency in Spanish, he could deal with them correctly. I wasn't fluent in Spanish in those days. I could speak Spanish, but it wasn't fluent at all. But Nestor was a key operator down there at that time, and we were good buddies. We were all good buddies. We thought it was kind of a lark, throwing somebody else's government. We're all a bunch of young guys, and so we were. There were very few of us down there.
I mean, you weren't questioning things at that time.
No, not at all. It was a job to do.
Yeah.
it was my business. I was working there. It was a job.
The reason I bring up Neston, I'll come to him later on. You and him on opposite sides.
Right, of course.
So now you're down there, and you're engineering shipments from Honduras.
Yeah, we got the arms together. We got the Guatemalan exiles that were down there. That we organized them. We really had a very, very small group. It wasn't what you might call an army.
Not too distant a parallel to Honduras today used as a base
No,
against
no,
Nicaragua.
no. That's right. It was somewhat of a parallel.
Now, what did you know about things, about the guy you're going to overthrow, Arbenz? What were you told about him?
Well, we were, of course, told that Arbenz was organizing a communist government for Guatemala, and we were preventing the establishment of a communist base in this hemisphere, which is what we're hearing right now.
This is Colonel Philip Roettinger you're hearing, in case you tuned in late. Colonel, U.S. Marine Corps, retired, and in '50 joined the CIA. So how about a message now, and then we'll resume with Colonel Roettinger and his adventures. Let's resume with Colonel Phil Roettinger, recalling his experience in Guatemala, 1954.
Arbenz, of course, was not a communist. He was a colonel in the army, but he had a very sincere reformist policy. And he felt that it was time to reform the government of Guatemala and get completely away from the old Ubico dictatorship. And I think he had his ideas were excellent. He wanted to, well, in fact, he already established land reform, the possibility of union activity among workers, all sorts of things like that. And of course, where he made his big mistake was expropriating property of the United Fruit Company. And he expropriated unused land. It was not planted or anything. And he volunteered to pay for it. And of course, his great mistake, I suppose, was volunteering to pay what the United Fruit Company carried as value on their tax rolls, which was a ridiculously low figure. Yeah. And I think that was the only reason in the world why we overthrew the government. Frankly.
As you're saying this, a retrospect is involved here. At the time, you were unaware of this.
Oh, I was completely unaware of it.
But this is almost a parallel of some 50 years before,
That's
say,
right, exactly.
When Smedley Butler,
exactly,
here's your prototype in a way,
right,
led him to Nicaragua because they were expropriating
exactly
or whatever was they were doing.
What they wanted to anyway. And
Sandino
had
the United Fruit.
You see, Sandino was a similar reformist. He wanted to free his country from foreign intervention, and that's what Arbenz wanted to do. And you just don't get away with that with the United States. I'm telling you, you don't get away with it without a fight.
Not when United Fruit Company's involved.
Exactly.
Or Anaconda Copper, I
suppose.
Of
course.
And then what happened? So
well, then, of course, we organized these people there, and Colonel Castillo Armas was our hand-picked guy who would do just exactly what we wanted.
Did you know him?
Oh, yes.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, of course I did. Yeah,
What was he?
Worked with him. He was the little fox-faced, nervous little guy that I had no respect for whatsoever. When I first went down there, the people said, "Oh, you're Castillo Armas. You're going to like him. He's the kind of guy you'll like." Well, I heard that also during the Vietnam War about Thieu. Lew Walt, the Marine commander, who was a classmate of mine in Command and Staff School. "Oh, you would have liked Thieu." Well, I'm tired of hearing people tell me who I would like. And I didn't like Castillo Armas. I thought he was a miserable little guy. But it was a job, and he was assigned to us. So he's the guy we're going to put in as president.
At that time, Allen Dulles was head of CIA.
Oh, yes.
Did you meet him?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes, indeed.
What were the conversations with Dulles?
Well, Dulles was, to my mind, was a very pompous sort of individual. He had this wonderful record in World War II in espionage work in Europe. And he was a sort of an impressive but rather pompous individual, and I wasn't favorably impressed with him. He came down to our base in Florida and gave us a lecture there and told us, but he didn't seem to know exactly what was going on, because he'd say, "I want to tell me about your plans down there," and he'd puffing on his pipe, and So we'd explain that, and then he'd ask Al Haney, who was the boss, he says, "Is that according to the plan?" You know, and I thought, my God, if he doesn't know the plan, well, we're in trouble. But he really he didn't seem to be really understanding what we were supposed to be doing. I was very unfavorably impressed with him. He was a very distinguished looking man. He had on, you know, he was all dressed up with his nice clothes. We didn't wear impressive clothes, but he was all dressed up. He'd puff on his pipe, and he's a distinguished looking guy. But I didn't think he knew what he was talking about, frankly.
But you were down there now.
And then when I was down there, of course, it was far removed from Allen Dulles.
So now Armas, and how was Arbenz overthrown?
Well, it was a lot of manipulation more than anything else. We had a group of Guatemalan exiles that could not be considered an army by any means. They weren't the numbers. I think we didn't have over 60 or 70 people, as I recall. It could not have possibly overcome the country. But what happened was that we had people in Guatemala City. We had a colonel there that was on our side, and he kind of had ambitions to take over himself. And he's the one that talked Arbenz into renouncing. And of course, when we got there with our guy, he said, "Well, didn't want to do that." And that's where Purifoy came into
John Purifoy.
John Purifoy convinced this other officer that Castillo Armas was our man. And as a matter of fact, I have heard, I'm not sure, but I've heard that he pulled a gun on him. And this is, of course, I don't.
But did they talk? How they talk Arbenz into do some with the pressures now? Or
well, they actually told him, they said, "Look, the jig's up. I mean, you're going to have to leave. You know, the army's going to take over anyway, so you might as well renounce." And he did. I guess he just saw, well, like I say, the jig was up. And this is something I had absolutely nothing to do with, of course, and this is all I've learned later. But Castillo Armas was a very unimpressive guy. He was very. The only thing was he was malleable. He would do what we told him because he wanted to have power too. You see.
So this is the situation. That's how the Guatemalan thing occurred.
Yeah, and he took over, of course, as president, and I think it was a year later he was assassinated, and then one of the other people that were sort of candidates for this job when we were selecting somebody, Miguel Idigoras Fuentes, was an older man, a hardliner, and he thought maybe he was going to get the job, and we picked Castillo Armas. That made him pretty upset. So he took over. He took over after Castillo Armas was assassinated and became president. And that initiated an era of military dictatorships and genocide and terrible, terrible things in Guatemala, just awful.
In Guatemala today,
it hasn't recovered. In fact, it's still going on. Yeah. Even though they now have an elected civilian president, he still doesn't have power over the army. He doesn't dare discipline the army too much because they'd overthrow him.
And we know that its record, as far as human rights, may be one of the worst, perhaps the worst.
Yes, of course.
Amnesty International. But we still run it, the United States.
Well, I'm sure we still have a lot of influence there.
So what about Phil Roettinger?
No. Well, of course, after all that was all over, I went back to headquarters and helped pick up the pieces of the thing because we'd done so many bad things down there. We had to justify a lot of things.
By the way, you yourself now, you're a guy about mid-40s now.
Yeah.
And you're still not questioning these things.
No, I didn't question anything because there'd been so much activity. I didn't have time to question anything.
Right.
When I got back to headquarters, a number of the guys that were involved had gone on to other things, and I had to write up a number of reports justifying or explaining some of the things we did. For instance, when we were down there, we had this wild guy, Rip Robertson, who was senior to me, as a matter of fact, but he was wild. I mean, he had these wild ideas, and for instance, there was
Robertson, R.I.P.?
That was his nickname,
No.
William. Robertson. And so we were down, after we fled from Honduras down to Managua, one jump ahead of the OAS inspection team that was sent down there to find out whether the United States had anything to do with it or not. We fled to Managua.
Oh, there was an OAS inspection team.
Oh, yeah.
The organization.
Guatemala requested that. the government of Guatemala, this is before the thing was over, Guatemala requested an inspection team to discover whether the United States had any complicity in this action, and naming Tegucigalpa, Honduras.
When Guatemala asked for it, you mean the Guatemala of
Arbenz.
Of Arbenz.
Right. So we got the word that they were on their way down there. We gathered up everything and jumped in a little plane and flew to Managua to escape there. And we got down to Managua, and while we were down there, we had a couple of aircraft, three aircraft down there, fighter planes, and Rip Robertson said, say there's a British ship unloading stuff up there in a port on the Pacific, and boy, they shouldn't be doing that, see? So he sent one of these guys up to bomb it, and they sank it.
My God.
Sank this British
This ship was unloading stuff for the Nicaraguan government.
For the Guatemalan
government of Arbenz.
Yeah, there was nothing, no military equipment at all.
We sank a British ship.
We sank a British ship. And this guy, I'll never forget, we had a P-38, a twin boom fighter plane, and we strapped a bomb underneath it, and this guy, Shoup, American renegade Air Force guy, flew up there and skip bombed the ship and sank it. And that's what I had a little doubt about that.
Well, were there any repercussions of that?
Oh, the British government raised hell about it. And when I got back to Washington, I had to write a report on it explaining exactly what happened, because nobody knew exactly what happened. And Rip Robinson had gone somewhere else, and everybody dispersed, of course, and I was stuck in the headquarters, and I had to write a report on this thing, and I reported that's exactly what happened. We decided that this ship shouldn't have been unloading things there. We helped sank it, and everybody was absolutely appalled about it. I had to explain that to the higher echelons of the organization and everything. It took me I spent almost a year in headquarters just writing reports and having conferences with people explaining all the dumb things we did down there. And you see, that's the trouble with an organization like CIA. There's so much secrecy involved that people they start doing things on their own. They were not only not authorized, but some of them are actually prohibited from doing it. One minor instance, of course, was that we were down there and we had 3 aircraft and only 2 pilots, because one guy was a renegade American by the name of Jerry Delarme. He was a Mexican-American, Los Angeles American, I don't know what he was, but he's kind of soldier of fortune type. And we were absolutely prohibited from hiring him because he was a bad guy. Well, we had 3 planes and only 2 pilots, and he was the only other one around it. So all we did was give him another name and hire him. So when I got back to...
Was he a renegade? In what way was he a renegade?
Well, he'd done some bad things. He had served some other forces,
I see, sort of a mercenary.
Yeah, mercenary, exactly what it was. So when we got back, he did a hell of a job under this other name. So I got back to headquarters in Miami, and Al Haney said, God, where did you find that great pilot, that did all that great stuff? And I said, oh, for Christ's sake, that was Jerry Delarme. And he went straight up. See, like I say, we did things we were actually prohibited from doing, not only not authorized. So that's the way an organization like this works. You get guys in it that have this feeling, and they just go off half-cocked in a lot of cases and get everybody in trouble.
And then what happened in your
case?
Okay,
then it was all over, of course, and I was back in headquarters, and then...
In Washington?
In Washington, yeah. So then I worked there for a while, and then in 1955, I was given the opportunity to be transferred to Mexico City, to the station in Mexico City. So then I went down there and moved my family down there and so forth. There was
This with the Marines now?
No, this was still CIA.
Still CIA. What do you do as CIA guys, say, in Mexico City?
Well, of course, when you're in a station, you're a part of the embassy, and you engage in various operations that you think are worthwhile. Of course, what you're trying to do is to penetrate the Russian organization in these various places. And I was talking to my kids a while back, and they didn't. My children didn't even know what I was doing. I never developed anything in anybody, and so they said, "Well, Dad, boy, you must have gotten a lot of good intelligence in Mexico City when you were there. And I said, so far as I remember, we didn't get one damn thing of any importance the whole time I was there. Everybody working like mad, you know, and mostly I found that our people were running operations against each other. Jealousies. The chief of the station down there was a maniac, absolute maniac. He was a man who had a complex of power, and everything we did was for his aggrandizement. It was a guy who was maniac. He's now dead. We're talking about the dead, but he was a very attractive, very wonderful looking guy, but he was as crooked as a day as long. I'm going to tell you, he would run operations against each one of us. And in a place like that, you run agents, of course, naturally. You run Mexican people. And a curious thing, I had working for me a Mexican by the name of Naranjo, which is the word for orange. So long before Vietnam, I was personally exposed to my own Agent Orange.
You're Agent Orange, yeah. But in the meantime, you're still not questioning and dissenting.
Oh no! It was still was a job.
Yeah,
Still was a job.
It's a job to be
trying our damnedest to contribute something.
Yeah.
See? But that's when I began to wonder about it, because I said, look, this outfit is ridiculous. We're wasting an awful lot of money. So I finally decided that this is not for me. I forget it. I left the whole thing right there in Mexico, and I went into business in Mexico. But it really was quite an eye opener to see how little we were accomplishing. We didn't accomplish a damn thing. Went around. We worked like mad. Went around in circles. Everything. Didn't accomplish a damn thing.
So what disillusioned you at the beginning, the first step, was the fact that this was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
That there was the battles inside.
Yeah, right. And so I really became completely disenchanted with the whole effort. This is not for me. This is not where I want to live. So that's how I
and then
separated myself from it.
And now it's leading up to what led to you questioning the whole idea, the whole policy of U.S.
Yeah, I began to question
so far
the whole
you're not
policy.
questioning
And of course,
the policy, you're questioning the procedures.
yeah, exactly, the procedure. The policy, well, I didn't worry too much about that, but the actual mechanics of the thing it was crazy, because we had a bunch of people that were largely incompetent. They masked their incompetence with a lot of words and a lot of make-up stuff that they were. I really just didn't think it was. The whole effort was not worthwhile.
So you went into private business then?
Yeah, I went private business.
And what'd you do?
Well, I went into a company that was manufacturing firearms, because I've been in firearms.
Oh, this was Colt. No, this was after.
No, this is
the second time.
Yeah, this is there was a little company there in Mexico. Was making inoffensive firearms, 22 rifles and so forth. And so I went into that company and later took the company over and became the owner of the company and made it into a pretty good gun factory. We had a fine organization. We had about 110 employees, and we made good products. And then, of course, in 1971, the government closed it. The government, Mexican government, by presidential edict, closed all gun activities in Mexico. There's no gun stores, there's no nothing.
Oh, really?
That's right. You can't buy a gun in Mexico.
Oh, really?
They don't have a National Rifle Association in Mexico.
You remember NRA?
I'm a life member of the NRA.
I'll give you a big credential.
Yeah, that's a good credential that I don't use very often.
No, but go ahead. So then
I when that happened, I of course lost that business and lost my shirt because I had invested a good deal of money and time into it. But then that's when I decided to become an artist, which I'd always wanted to be all my life. And so I began my, fourth or fifth career as an artist. And moved from Mexico City up to San Miguel Allende. And I lived there for a number of years. It's a delightful place to live. I was doing my art and so forth. And then I became convinced that the United States is doing further bad things in the area.
I realized that It's the procedure, the mechanics that disillusioned you. That was when you quit. Now you began to question U.S. policy.
Oh yes, yes. Well, you see, I had lived in San Miguel for quite a number of years, working hard at working in my profession as an artist, and I began to. We have a little newspaper in San Miguel, and I began to write a weekly column for the newspaper, and I wrote on humorous subjects, and sometimes subjects concerning the times, and I began to read about our actions in Central America, and I thought, my God, this is kind of a replay of what I remember. And so I wrote several columns about that, about Nicaragua, and then I began to become conscious of my feeling that something ought to be done by somebody who knows this area and has had experience in doing these tragic things to Central America. So that's when I began to be conscious of the Nicaraguan situation, and I decided that I'd better get involved in it. So that's when in February, I went to Nicaragua.
February of
this year.
Of 86.
Yes, right.
Now, did you meet people who played roles in this thing, in your evolving?
You played roles in
your change.
The change of
you, yeah.
No, not really. I think that mostly it was a personal change of my own. I actually when I went to Nicaragua, I met David McMichael, who had gone through somewhat.
Then you decided to go to Nicaragua.
That's right. That's right.
You want to see what's going on there.
Yeah, exactly. I want to see, because I'd heard a lot of stories about it, and you can't believe many of the stories. So I'll go down there and find out myself what's going on. And I did go down, and at that, when I was down there, is when I met David McMichael, who had a similar change of heart. But he had been in the Marine Corps, later on, latter-day Marine Corps, also been with CIA, and in fact he was CIA military analyst. And he had gone down to Nicaragua to determine whether or not the Nicaraguans, as the State Department and the government had stated, that they were supplying arms to the Salvadorian rebels. And he determined when he got down there that it was just not so. There was no evidence whatsoever of the Sandinistas sending arms to the Salvadorian rebels. And that got him in considerable difficulty, and he was at odds with the CIA, and so he resigned. He left to operate on his own. A great guy.
What did you find? You went to Nicaragua. Why don't you recreate this then?
Okay.
February of 86.
Right.
You went there just on your own?
On my own. I just went down and got a ticket on Aeronica and flew into Managua.
Paid your own way?
Paid my own way, of course. I didn't want to have anybody contributing to it, because that would...
You went down there because you wanted to know what's going on?
Exactly. So I went down and flew into Managua on Aeronica and landed at the Augusto Cesar Sandino Airport, and immediately I began investigating what was going on in Nicaragua. The first day I was there, I met up with a tour group, a small tour group from the United States. Some ladies and a couple of fellas, and they said, why don't you join us? We're going over to visit a daycare center for children of working mothers. I said, fine, I'll go along. So I went over to this daycare center, and they had 250 kids from, I think maybe 3 months old all the way up to 6 years old, and they were beautiful children, and it was just a great experience. The kids all flocked around, wanted their pictures taken, gave me drawings that they had done, little stick figures like all kids do. And while I was there, they had an air raid drill. And I said, what's this for? They had little air raid shelters, and the kids all jumped in there giggling, as kids will do, they thought it was a great thing. I said, what are you having an air raid drill for? And they said, well, you have to protect these children against the bombardment of the United States invasion. And I said, do you really think that the United States is going to invade Nicaragua? Oh, yes. I said, how do you think that? Well, your president has sworn that he's going to overthrow our government, and these Contras are not going to accomplish it, so what else is he going to do? He's going to have to invade. And I said, oh boy, we're in trouble. This really, really hit me hard. Because when I thought of bombardment possibly killing these beautiful children, I thought, oh man, we got to do something about this quick. So then I went around and I had interviews with opposition party leader, one of the opposition party leaders.
Did you interview opposition party leaders?
Yes, I met with Virgilio Godoy, who was
Was there any, do you have any difficulty?
No difficulty.
The government?
No, there's no difficulty. Although this opposition leader, Virgilio Godoy of the Liberal Party, explained to me, he said, we're restricted in our movements around here and so forth, and he said, actually meeting with you is illegal. And I said, well, what are you doing it for? Well, he says, I want to talk to you. And so there were several of us there. And as a matter of fact, I was with the same tour group. There were about 6 of us. And I acted as translator because none of them spoke English, Spanish, and Godoy didn't speak any English, so I translated and he was an interesting man. He's a nice guy, a pretty smart guy, but he was smarting.
Is he talking openly?
Oh, talked openly, completely openly. And he complained about the Sandinistas and so forth. And I said, well, now, what about the Contras? What do you think about them? Oh, no, we don't have anything to do with the Contras. It's, no, we're working here in the country, and those guys are, these fellows, Robelo and Calero and Arturo Cruz, they live in Key Biscayne, Florida, and we have nothing to do with them. We don't want any part of them.
So he's talking opposition and talks openly.
Exactly. Completely openly. Of course, he said, now, I'm not supposed to do this,
but he wasn't arrested.
But the thing, no, of course not.
So go ahead. You were talking about you and the cab driver.
Yeah. Well, then after that, then I went to a little hotel there. It was really hardly even called a hotel. A little, very primitive place, and there was a cab driver there. So I said, look, I want to hire you, but by the day, let's go travel around this country. He said, fine, okay. So I hired him, and we drove all over the country. We drove to Matagalpa, and we drove up to the north to Esteli, and we drove up into the combat zone, the war zone they call it there, which is a war zone actually, and we moved around freely all over the country. Never were stopped once, except as this military post up in the wilds up there that advised us not to go any further because of the fact that there'd been Contra activity there the night before. And I asked the military man there, I said, are you preventing us from going? Oh, no, we're not preventing you. You can go if you want to, but we just have to advise you that it's very dangerous. And we went anyway, and then we went up, and I saw a health center that had been destroyed, a whole cooperative farm area that had been destroyed, houses burned, people killed, women and children killed by our Contras, by yours and mine and President Reagan's Contras. And I formed a belief then. I said, if the American people could really know what we're doing, I cannot believe that they would support it. But the American people have been so misinformed. These people that are doing all these atrocities and killing women and children are supposed to be freedom fighters. That's a horrible thing. But the American people don't know. I don't believe they would support it. I just have that faith in the American people. Perhaps it's misplaced, because I know there's a whole bunch of American people who would do almost anything against communism. But I also find, in my travel through Nicaragua, I found absolutely no evidence of communism as we believe communism to be. The people move around freely, they speak freely, they have meetings and discuss things freely. I didn't find any of the effects of communism, for instance, as in Russia or Poland or something like that. These people are, and they're proud of their revolution, and they constantly talk about free Nicaragua.
So the great many people you met were for the government.
Well, I found complaints against the government. People say, oh, well, we don't like the way they're doing so and so. And I talked to a group of them that were talking about the agrarian reform. And they said, oh, they're giving land to certain guys and they're not giving it to some others and so forth. And I said, you like to complain. And the old man was standing there and he said, yes, they can complain now. Years ago, if I complained, I'd have been shot. And that's a very, very telling thing, that they can complain now. And now I know if anybody starts talking about overthrowing the government, they're going to lock him up. But they complain, and they can, our farmers are not complaining. Our labor leaders are not complaining. Come on, everybody. There's
is
no
what-
country in the world where the people don't complain about their government.
But now, Bill Roettinger now is now questioning his government.
Of course, of course. I think I'm maturing a little bit. It's
Now,
about time.
beginnings, did Vietnam in any way play a role?
Well, Vietnam probably turned me around more than anything else. I didn't serve in Vietnam. By then I was retired from the Marine Corps. But I observed it very, very objectively as much as I could. And I realized, and I actually studied the Vietnam, read about it, the early phases of it and the causes of it and so forth. And I felt that the government has just gone haywire completely. And that probably turned me around more than anything else. And I figured, well, by golly, if my government can do that, it's capable of almost anything. And we just have to be vigilant and have to oppose the government when it does these things.
But your area, of course, is Latin America.
Well, of course, yes, right. I had no experience in
You're
Vietnam
talking
whatsoever.
about Spanish, and you're talking also about Congressman, lack of understanding of another culture.
Oh, absolutely,
You
absolutely.
talked about gathering meetings with Ortega.
Oh yes, you take these congressmen that go down there, and they spend 15 or 20 minutes or an hour talking to one of the leaders down there. They can't possibly get the feeling of the country. They don't speak the language. They have to work with interpreters, and that never does the job. I mean, you can go in and talk to them and even joke with them and you know, be one of them. They develop a confidence in you, and they'll unburden themselves, and they'll tell you all kind of things.
They're talking about
Sure.
The lack of knowledge, and this off the cuff,
Right.
off the
Well,
cuff conclusion.
for instance, on our last trip, I was fortunate to have a long interview with Tomas Borges. You know he's
Borges.
right. He's one of the original
Now,
founders.
he's the minister of what?
Minister
Foreign Affairs?
Minister of Interior,
Minister of
which
Interior.
is probably the most powerful position in the government, really, because that's like, well, he's in charge of all the activities in the country, the security and all that stuff. And he's been pictured as being a hardline Marxist and a bad guy and I don't know what all. And I found him to be a very warm and wonderful individual. I had this marvelous conference with him. I feel that he is probably more of a Christian than anything else. Of course, he's Catholic, but he probably follows the basic teachings of Jesus Christ more than anybody else around. He's a man that has a warm love for his people, and you know, in our history with Latin America, we have never really favored the people that love their own people. We favored the people that say they love the United States, and some tin-horn dictator, all he has to do down there is say, boy, I think the United States is great and I'm an anti-communist, and we give him anything he wants. Now this guy is an independent, all of them are very independent people down there, and they feel that, by golly, we now have our own country to ourselves. We're independent from the United States, and it's the only country in Central America that's completely independent from the United States.
You know, you just said something terribly important. We back the guys who don't say, I love my own people.
That's right.
But I love you, U.S.
Exactly. And
so this
if we would just select the people that demonstrably love their own people, we couldn't go wrong. We couldn't go wrong. But we never do that.
You know, I was thinking the whole history of Latin America, of course, long before, as I say, long before Castro was even a blush on his mother's cheek, long before there ever was a Kremlin, the battle went on revolutions Latin America ever since the conquistadores.
Sure, that's right.
So I suppose then what did you do? You, Phil Roettinger, it's your story. We're talking about changes. Then you've swung around then.
I have certainly swung around, and I think that anybody who has an open mind and experience with these people would do the same thing. Now, these people I go back to Nestor Sanchez. You see,
Oh,
he's
Sanchez,
been working with the government all this time.
He's your old friend.
Yeah, he's an old friend, and I like him, and I still like him, and I can't really condemn him for being a hardliner with the Defense Department and so forth, because he's been exposed to nothing else. See, he doesn't have the experience that I've had, and he hasn't lived with these people. He hasn't worked with these people, the ordinary people, the working class people. And I have done this for 30 years now. I employed them in my company, and then I moved up to San Miguel, and I worked with these country people there that come up here as wetbacks. And they're my friends, and I listen to their problems and help them. And you see, he's never had that experience.
But I'm thinking, this man, Nestor Sanchez, your old friend, whom you still talk to on the phone,
right? Oh yeah,
they're on different sides of the fence.
Yeah,
is Mexican American.
Yes.
Now you said
let's say he's Latin American. Well, he's New Mexican American.
He's
which
New
is,
Mexican
yeah,
American. I mean,
yeah.
as a Mexican
Latin
heritage,
right?
Of legacy, ancestry.
Exactly.
But you said something about someone like that to prove he's an American has to go over and beyond.
Yeah, I think you're right. And as I say, he's had no other experience since his youth. He joined the CIA when he was very young, a lot younger than I was. And he's had nothing but this experience. And I say, I can't condemn him for that because he doesn't know anything else. And if I had stayed in, perhaps I'd be the same way. Just by accident, I left. And I don't give myself any particular credit for it because I just had this experience. And I have had a completely different experience than these other people.
When you and he on the phone with when you talk with him,
Mm-hmm.
what do you say to one another?
Well, I said, Nestor, this is Phil Roettinger, a voice from the past. And he said, oh, yeah, well, yeah, I've been reading about you. And I said, yes, and I guess you can imagine they were on different sides of the fence now. Yeah, see, yeah, he said, yeah. Well, he said, I just wish you would, wish you'd stick to the facts. And I said, well, I wish you would too, Nestor. So then we got to talking about, I talked about our families and so forth, and I told him about my wife having this problem, and he said, well, he's been through that. His wife had the same problem, and that, he says, have you read the book that we prepared over here? And I said, no, I haven't. Well, I can send it to you. He always got a book about facts, quote facts about Latin America. And I said, sure, send it over to me. I'll be glad to read it. So and we talked a while and said, well, next time you come up, let's get together and that's anything. I said, sure.
I'm thinking about you, this world you left. You've been now in the States and you travel about a bit, do you?
Sure.
So what do you sense in the country?
Well, the big problem I have, Starts, is the fact that the American people have been just flat lied to for so long. I think they've gotten used to it. And it doesn't seem to have any effect on them anymore. They've been lied ever since, going as far back as you can imagine. They were lied to. Guatemala, they were lied about that. They thought we were overthrowing a communist government. And they've been lied to about Cuba. They've been lied to about Chile. They've been lied to about all these things that we've engaged in. And I don't think they know the truth from a lie anymore. And it's extremely difficult to convince the American people what we should be doing. And this is terrible. It's just hard to do. I've talked to people, old friends of mine, about what we're doing. And for instance, I have a very warm friend in Phoenix, Arizona. He's an advertising executive, his own advertising agency, wonderful guy. And they have a little house in San Miguel and come down every so often. And they're some of our very best friends. And I talk like this. He said, "Oh my God, you're way out. We ought to go down there and just blast Nicaragua off the face of the earth. Just destroy it." Now, here's a man that has children. I just can't believe what he's saying. And he's a good guy. They're not bad people, but they just don't have the feeling that they should have about these things. And it's very distressing.
He's been told these guys are a threat.
Yeah, they're a threat. When I was lobbying Congress, walking around there, talking to these people, and I talked to the aide of a congressman from Indiana, and I figured, well, I'll be able to talk to him because I'm from Ohio. And I started talking like this. Oh, I said, don't tell me about Nicaragua. The Russians are down there going to come up through Nicaragua, come up through Guatemala, and come up through Mexico, and by God, they'll be right on our border. And I said, who's going to do that? Oh, the Russians. I said, how many Russians are in Nicaragua? Oh, the place is overrun with Russians. I said, listen, the Americans that are working down there outnumber the Russians 200 to 1. There aren't you don't even know how many Russians are down there. And I've been all over that country, and I have yet to find a Russian, and I was looking for them. I know they're there, of course. But, oh, don't tell me about that, you know. I said, I live in Mexico, and we're not concerned about them coming through Mexico. Well, you ought to be. I said, excuse me, I'm wasting your time and mine, too.
So this is, yeah. When you told that Phoenix ad guy, you know, who loves his kids, you know, you tell him about your child care center visit?
About my what?
You visit the child care center?
Yeah. Well, he says, you know, that was all set up for you. That was all set up for you. Yeah. You know.
But
they have a closed mind.
Yeah,
they
you're
will
saying
not
something
believe
about
anything.
good people. See that book I'm looking at there? That's the galleys, or three galleys, of this book on Germany, of ordinary people. Never been done, first time, by a German, writes for the Spiegel.
Right.
And it's talking to ordinary people of all variety. What was their life like during Hitler times? And just many of them just ordinary, decent people going along and not bothering apolitical. And I'm not saying there's a parallel.
Well,
I'm
it could
saying
be.
It's possible.
Yeah, it could be. I'll tell you what, if you go out here in Illinois, some little town in Illinois, and talk about Nicaragua, there's a certain number of people that say, what's Nicaragua? And the rest of the people say, communist, it's a hotbed of communism. You know, the president has told us it's a hotbed of terrorism down there. And if you go and say, look, I've been all around the country, and the only terrorists I've found are Reagan's terrorists. That's a fact. I never found any terrorists down there, except ours.
When you say that, with the reaction, of course, is one.
Well, they think, oh my God, who's this guy? You know what? Boy,
well, you live in Mexico now, painting. And this,
yeah.
When you visit U.S. though, generally, did you find this? Do you come across young people here?
Well, I tell you what, the young people are the easiest to talk to, frankly.
They are easy.
Yeah, they're the easiest to talk to. See, young people nowadays, you can't put so much over on them like you used to. They have an automatic resistance to propaganda, and I think that the young people could be the saving of this thing.
Well, you see, I'm working on both ends of this thing.
Yeah.
And I find both. Find some of the young completely blacked out. You know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm sure. Oh,
Yeah,
sure,
you know,
sure.
I don't mean just the uppies. I mean this is the whole general no pass.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've got this. So obviously, we're in, as this phrase used, this is an in the meantime period.
Yeah. Right.
What else comes
That's
to
an
your
interesting
mind?
phrase.
Coming
Well,
back to Phil Roettinger.
Yeah. Right. The big problem we have, of course, the biggest problem we have right now with regard to our foreign policy is Mr. Reagan. Mr. Reagan, when he was elected, I said, this man is going to be the most dangerous president we ever had. And the reason it's so dangerous is because he's so popular. He can get away with things that nobody else could get away with. I don't think it's going to last. I think we're going to see through him before long. But he has this enormous popularity that he can do things like he can bomb that poor little country of Libya and practically destroy, and 75% of the people countries. It was wonderful.
Popular.
It made the United States is standing tall.
Grenada.
Like an elephant standing tall over a mouse.
Yeah. I was like Muhammad Ali knocking the hell out of Woody Allen.
Exactly.
But you know, popularity zoomed as it did after Grenada.
Yeah, of course. Here we go into Grenada, and my God, it took us, how many days it took us to overcome those few Cubans over there? And the whole, the Army gave away some like thousands of medals. Oh, Lord, it was so bad, I just can't believe it.
So coming back to...
And so there's more, but I think you get the idea. That's Colonel Philip Roettinger. I better explain who he is for those who may have tuned in late so you'll know his credentials. Most of his life, he was one of the great sharpshooters of the country. joined the Marines. At first, difficult because he's 6'5", though he was too tall. And much of his time, he became a colonel, U.S. Marine Corps, and then worked for a good number of years for the CIA in Latin America.